of free G&D's ice cream, you're in for an absolute treat. The lineup is we'll have a talk by Kaz Dodds, followed by a Q&A. And also just to say, we know you have like different commitments. If you've got like 2 o'clock classes or anything, feel free to slip out at any point. That's no worries. Anyway, back to this Q&A. We have a really cool little Slido vibe thing, which hopefully a link to will appear on the screen, potentially. And basically, when that appears, that's the one. Exciting. Send in questions throughout the talk. It's completely anonymous, so you can ask absolutely anything, and we'll discuss them with Kaz afterwards. Yeah, take photos of that. That's a really good idea, and scan it and everything. Sadly, before we continue, coronavirus is still a thing, so do keep your mask on when you're inside, and at the end, the stewards will direct you out. But yeah, so without much further ado, I'd love to welcome Kaz up to the stage. Now, Kaz and I were talking earlier on about scones, and I don't know whether to be in awe or slightly disappointed that Kaz is actually not very opinionated on the topic. So, like, explain to me, I asked Kaz, if you were given the choice, if you were just given a plain scone and cream and jam, like, what would you do?
I just think there are bigger things in life to worry about, so I refuse to give that question my brain power, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to say, I'm totally ambivalent on that matter.
Fair enough.
Cream, jam, cream. If
Fair
it's
enough.
there, that's fine.
You do
enough
you.
for me.
That's fine, you're neutral. We can convert you. We can work on that through the week. But yeah, and now on to a slightly less important but still good to know kind of thing. Tell me a bit about yourself. Where are you from? Yeah, just a bit about you.
Well, it's lovely to be here. As the lady introduced me, my name is Kaz. I come from Edinburgh. It's very exciting to have been travelling today for the first time in a long time. I work in Edinburgh as a civil servant. I work for the Scottish Government, but I'm on holiday this week, getting to speak with you, lovely people. So in my spare time, I like to do things like this. So there really is kind of nothing more interesting or exciting for me to kind of get to discuss some of life's biggest questions with these wonderful minds. I'm really genuinely interested to hear your thoughts on these subjects as well, so please do be putting in your questions, or when we get the moment, do stick your hand up to ask one as well, because I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. So that's me. I suppose the other thing to say is I spend a lot of my week looking after 2 4-year-olds, my twins, Ada and Isabel. I'm married to Kieran, who works as a photographer, and that's kind of my essential knowledge, I guess.
Fab. Thank you so much. So Kaz today is talking to us on the topic of how can we know what's true. All of the sort of lunchtime talks this week will be following this sort of big life questions theme. So take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lily. Let me come over here. As I say, it really is just lovely to be here. I know that none of you are in kind of holiday mode, all gearing up for things like exams and that sort of thing. But for me, this is just really good fun. So thanks so much for coming. And as Lily said, we'll be addressing some of these big questions. Today's is, how can we know what's true? And that question has been asked and answered very differently by different societies, different thinkers, different people throughout time, hasn't it? So I want to come at this question with a degree of humility, and in the short time that we have, say that I'm pretty confident I won't be able to kind of address all of the various things that might be in your minds with this question. So I'll narrow the scope a little bit and say that what I want to do in the next 10 minutes or so is consider, how does our culture today think about this matter of truth? How might we evaluate truth claims, and in particular, those made by Christianity? So I'm going to go out on a limb at the start here and say that probably, as students at one of the world's finest universities, knowledge is something precious to you. You've probably seen in your own life where knowledge can take you. And yet, I think we have quite an ambiguous relationship with truth, this thing that we call truth. On the whole, I would say that we're fairly skeptical of truth claims. Western philosophy for the last few hundred years has largely been encouraging us to be more skeptical, to question what we know and how we know it. It's not just a Western European philosophical tradition that might lead us to be skeptical of absolute truth claims. In his book, How the World Thinks, which has a really beautiful cover, by the way, Julian Baggini divides cultures into those that are truth-seeking and those that are way-seeking, which I think is a really interesting way to come at this. He quotes Qinyang Li, writing about Chinese philosophy, who says, typically, we don't see truth as correspondence with objective facts in the world, rather as a way of being a good person, a good father, or a good son. Truth isn't carved in stone. So some of these forces, some of these kind of philosophical traditions might be why we find ourselves in what has been described as a post-truth society. Familiar with that phrase? Where we seem to esteem or prefer preferences over facts, where people are tired with experts or elites telling us what to think, and instead we tend to go with our gut on things. And so when it comes to some of life's biggest questions, who am I? Why am I here? Is there a God? Those sorts of things, I would say that the dominant kind of response from our culture today is to say, well, we just can't know. We can't be sure. That was absolutely my assumption growing up. That's kind of what I was born into, I guess. I would say that I was basically kind of taught that we couldn't really know either way on questions like whether or not there was a God. And so to live on the assumption that there wasn't one was fairly sensible. But we're not just skeptical. I would say that we're also nervous about truth claims. They feel kind of unappealing to us, especially religious truth claims, because they feel intolerant. They seem like a means of exerting power over someone else. And so we're nervous about them. Claims like the kind of claims made in the Bible, I'll put my hands up and say that. There's these copies called Uncover. They're an account of Jesus' life. They're John's Gospel, and they're scattered around. If you open those up, they're a gift from the CU, I think. Someone nod at me. They are. You can take those away. And if you open those up, and the first kind of sentences of John's Gospel, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with from, carol services, those sort of things, makes huge claims. The first sentence, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's on page 4, John's opening sentence. These huge claims, exclusive claims, claims that there is a God and that he looks like this. And so because we're skeptical and because we're nervous about these things, I would say that most of us have kind of adopted a view which sort of says, well, for example, about religions, they're kind of like lots of roads up the same mountain. There's no difference, really. We're skeptical about truth claims, we're nervous about them, and I think that has brought us to a new arrangement with truth. And that is essentially that we try to make our own. Live your own truth is one of our culture's kind of mantras, I would say, kind of top priority, live your own truth. I wonder if you watched The Social Dilemma, which is a documentary about social media last year. We were all just at home at that point watching Netflix. At least that's what I was doing for most of the year, actually. So I'm sure many of you saw it. It's a documentary that kind of looks at social media and lists its many evils, basically. So it talks about, for example, the fact that it is hugely addictive, that it is bad for our mental health, that all those sorts of things. But the whole program, I thought those things were kind of bad enough, but the whole program kind of builds up towards what it considers to be the biggest problem of all, and that is that social media essentially lets us create our own truth. Various tech geniuses explain how algorithms are created to show us more and more of what we like, keep throwing back our own preferences at us so that we keep clicking, and eventually we begin to think that the whole world is really in line with what we think. People have called that an echo chamber. One guy in the documentary says this: each person has their own reality with their own facts. That's partly why it is so hugely successful, isn't it? Because it feeds our desires. So at the last general election, several people said to me, but I just don't know anyone who votes Tory. How can this be? But And here's the crunch. Far from being that kind of nice roads up a mountain kind of situation, what that has actually led to is carnage. Again, from the same documentary, Tristan Harris, who was a former design ethicist at Google, said, if we don't agree on what's true, or that there is such a thing as truth, we're toast. If we can't agree on what's true, then we can't navigate our way out of our problems. And person after person who has worked in the tech industry goes on to say that this kind of design your own truth situation is ripping society apart. Of course, social media is totally not the problem, is it? Social media just shows us something about ourselves. That is that we want to surround ourselves with our own preferences, and that we're not always a good judge of truth, that sometimes we're led astray by what we want to be true. And that often clouds our judgment on what is. So whether it's the person that we have hurt because we thought we loved them when we didn't, or something trivial like the shoes that we thought would complete our life and yet didn't, we're all taken captive by what we want sometimes, I think. On a personal level, that's problematic. On a social level, it's devastating. And on an ethical level, it's a nightmare because in its absence, we discover how much truth matters. Conspiracy theories abound. Historical injustices are swept under the carpet. In a world where we each try to live our own truth, we're often found longing for a truth that is outside of us, that isn't contingent on me. This is why on questions of injustice, particularly historical injustice, we want inquiries to find out what's true. That's why you're coming to Oxford to hone your skills in this incredible institution, to be able to to better discern what's reality and what's not. So, where I've come to in these last 5 minutes, I've said that I think generally we're kind of skeptical about truth claims. We're nervous about them, and so we've come to this place where we try to make our own truth. But I don't think it's working out very well for us. Could there be another way? You might be surprised, if you're a skeptic, to see how many skeptics there are in the accounts of Jesus' life. Particularly this one that we're giving out this week. Excuse me. The first century accounts of Jesus' life are just full of people who display the kind of skepticism that you might be very familiar with. In the face of Jesus' claims to divinity, again and again, people dismiss him for one reason or another. Sometimes we see that very clearly. It's because their desires are clouding their capacity to see. Other times it's that they simply don't have enough evidence. And I wanted to look at one account today that starts on page 8. So if you can pick up these little books next to you, if you're watching at home, then the account will come up on the screens. And I'm going to start just at the bottom of page 8, under the heading that says, Jesus calls Philip and Nathanael. So we meet these different characters, and I wonder if you can see both on one hand a kind of very quick decision to believe, but on the other hand, a real skepticism. So I'll just start reading from the little number 43 at the bottom of page 8, where John writes, "The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, 'Follow me.' Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, 'We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph.'" And over the page, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. I'll just pause there. Nathanael's questions, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? I kind of wonder if it's a bit like Cambridge. Can anything good come from there? He's not kind of hiding his disdain and his prejudice there, is he? He's completely skeptical that anything good can come from Nazareth, let alone the Son of God. And yet Philip's response isn't, well, just believe, it's come and see. Come and see. When I first looked into Christianity, I was really surprised at that, actually, that the biblical texts didn't sort of assume that I had a faith already, didn't tell me to just believe, but instead invited me to come and see, sought to kind of lay out the evidence for me. And I suppose that's essentially what the Christian Union are wanting to do this week. We're saying, come and see. And philosophers have talked about justification and what counts as justification for knowledge or belief for centuries. I want to suggest that there is good external justification for belief in Christianity so that we can say, come and see. Christianity isn't a set of abstract propositions that are completely untestable. No, it's rooted in history, in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Take this gospel itself, this account of Jesus' life. It's not written like a lot of other kind of sacred books, which read like potentially a list of sayings to follow. No, this is written as a historical account. And we can kind of test that. We can scrutinize it and ask, does it stand up to scrutiny? We can ask questions like, what are the original source documents? Does the content stack up with what we know of the ancient world? Do non-biblical accounts agree? Those sorts of things. And on all of those, accounts like John's Gospel come out very well. Questions about when it was written. Well, the earliest manuscripts. We've got a few words from chapter 18 from between 125 and 150 AD. That's probably about 40 years after the Gospel was written. Compared to other ancient writing, that kind of blows other ancient writings out of the water in terms of how close we have copies to when they were written. For example, biographies of Alexander the Great, as a comparison, written by Arrian and Plutarch, the earliest copies we have are from about 400 years after his death. Or does the content stack up with what we know of the ancient world? As historical inquiry gets more and more sophisticated and developed, there's more and more aspects of the ancient world that corroborate the Bible accounts. So, for example, in the field of archaeology, in one point in John's Gospel, he describes a scene, and he describes the kind of building that this scene is taking place in, and he says that there were 5 covered colonnades. For a long time, that was taken as a reason to kind of discredit this gospel, because nobody knew of those sorts of structures, until the late 19th century, when archaeologists discovered exactly that structure. There's lots of examples like that about geography or the use of names or local customs where the content stacks up with what we know of the ancient world. Or do the non-biblical accounts agree? Well, even if you don't take any of the Bible books, if you just take kind of secular historians like Josephus, Tacitus, or Pliny, then you would still have in history one who prepared the way for Jesus, John the Baptist, Jesus being called the Christ, being killed by Pilate, and then a huge surge of people who started following Jesus as though he was God because they believed that he rose from the dead. So there is evidence that will help us to form a view on who Jesus is. And in the face of that evidence, I don't think we can write him off or as an irrelevance or as a good teacher. I think the evidence leads to the conclusion that he is what he claimed to be. I think there's good justification for coming to that conclusion. And I don't think it's intellectually honest to say, well, we just can't know. We can do what we do with just about every other area of life. We can look at the evidence available to us and come to the best conclusion that fits the evidence. But we still might worry that truth is oppressive. That second concern that we had, that we're nervous about truth because we think it's intolerant, it's oppressive. So I want to just pick up this story again, and I'll finish on this. So I'm back on page 10, and at the end of chapter 1 of John's account, and Philip just said to Nathanael, well, come and see. And when Jesus saw Nathanael, so this is the little 47 on page 10, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said to him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there's no deceit." "How do you know me?" Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree, before Philip called you." And then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." I like to imagine a modern-day Nathanael kind of thinking, right, I'm going to go and kind of assess Jesus. And in a modern day, maybe he's like a kind of little investigator with his little torch going up, trying to figure out what's there, ready to assess the truth. And instead of him shining a light on something, he meets the sunrise. The light shines on him. Instead of finding truth, truth finds him. Obviously, that little phrase, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit, was very important to him, and so that he realized Jesus knew something about him. And then the thing that really seals the deal, which seems bizarre to us, is that he says that I saw you while you were still under the fig tree. The question we're all asking, or at least I'm asking, is what happened under the fig tree, Nathaniel? What is it about what happened under the fig tree that he is so pinned down by that statement that Jesus says, I saw that? Seems bizarre, but I actually think there's probably things that all of us have that if people mentioned, then you might think, oh, how do you know that? I'm a very competitive person. As a teenager, over a game of Monopoly, I did something completely ridiculous as a dare to get Park Lane, Mayfair, and £500. That would guarantee me, secure me the win. I did something totally ridiculous. Now, my school friends knew about that. I moved on from that part of my life to university. Until, after coming back from one summer holiday, a university friend who'd been traveling that summer had met a school friend. And this university friend just said to me, want to play Monopoly? And instantly, my stomach, how does he know? I was kind of pinned down, exposed, revealed. I think we've probably all got things that we think, oh, I didn't want anyone else to know that, and you know it. If you weren't quite as wowed by Jesus' revelation here, then he has a word for you. The account finishes just in verse 50 there, where Jesus says, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. And that's kind of what John's done, is curate better things than that, to give us some evidence to help us to understand who Jesus might be. So, let me draw to a close here, because we're running out of time. Here's Nathaniel, standing in the sunrise, thinking that he's going to go and investigate truth, and actually truth has found him. And I suppose in the face of that kind of exposure and that kind of self-knowledge, he had two options. He could run and hide, or he could face the reality that he is known, not just by another person, but by the Son of God himself. And of course, under the conception of truth that most of us think of, that is, that truth is there to kind of exert power over us, or that it's used to keep people out, or to divide people, to hurt people, we of course would run and hide from that kind of truth. But the truth that Nathaniel is faced with, that is truth in a person, Jesus, is so different. That truth is real, is bright, is revealing, but it is full of grace. You see, Jesus shows us the kind of God that sees, that knows, and yet loves and forgives. The stuff that I said at the start about making our own truth, which is also known as inventing lies, isn't it? He sets us free from that. That's one of the effects that Jesus speaks about, truth setting us free. Jesus says that's what he's come to do, to forgive us for our dogged pursuit of my own truth, of running my own little planet. Jesus says that coming to see Jesus is like having a floodlight shone into every nook and cranny of my life. And yet, here also is utter grace and kindness and forgiveness. If truth looks like that, then wouldn't you want to know it? Good. Let me stop there because I'm really keen to hear what you think about these things and to move to some Q&A. So I will invite Lily back up, who will walk us through that. And I'll take a seat.
Brilliant. Brill. Thank you so much, Kaz. That was incredible. Some really intriguing and inspiring and challenging things there. So without much further ado, we'll jump straight into some questions. Do keep sending yours in. We've got some really good ones to start off with. Sorry about this. Okay, first question. If Christianity is claiming to be true, what is that to stop other religions also being true? Can't there be one truth or true God? that we get from lots of different directions. And similarly, in a similar vein, there was another question that's similar, which is, in what way is the authenticity of the Bible different from other religious texts? So,
good. So why couldn't it be that first part of the question, why couldn't it be that there is one God who is accessed through lots of different ways or different understandings, different sort of traditions, or even different religions? That absolutely could be the case, couldn't it? So it could be that there is one God and that we've got different ways of kind of getting to know that God, that God could have potentially revealed themselves in different ways. That could be true. If we look at the options before us, then I think to reduce the differences between the world's religions is to not really seriously to respect them. So, for example, to say to a Jewish person that Jesus is God would be a kind of blasphemous thing to say. To say to a pantheist that Jesus is God would kind of be like, well, yeah, lots of things are God, so that's not really, hugely life-changing. And if you were to say to an atheist, well, actually, I think really we essentially believe the same thing. You really believe in God. You're just accessing him a different way. Well, I think then we're just reducing their kind of intellectual integrity to fit with the way that I see the world. So I think there's a huge problem of respect when it comes to that kind of way of viewing the world, to say that, essentially there's just one God and we're all seeing him in different ways. It's really problematic kind of intellectually when we see the clear differences that there are between world religions, or indeed between kind of secular atheism or humanism. And also it just really lacks respect for people, I think, to say that, that they're different. We're nervous of saying that, I think, because often that difference has been used to push people out rather than to draw people in. I like to use my granny as an example of someone who was very happy to say that she disagreed with me, not because she hated me and she wanted to put a line between me and her, but because she loved me. My granny was an atheist. Granny Isabel said that she didn't need to read people like Richard Dawkins because she agreed with him already. And when I became a Christian, she would buy me tickets to his talks. He's a well-known atheist, in case you're not familiar with him. And she said to me, Caroline, it's such a shame that you're going to work at a church, which I did after graduating from university. She said, that's because one day you will realize, like the rest of us, that God doesn't exist. And you won't just have wasted your Sunday mornings, you will have wasted your whole life. Granny, tell it how it is. Now, she didn't say that because she hated me. She disrespected me. She said it because she loves me. And she loved me. She said it a couple years ago. And she wanted what was best for me. And I think we have to kind of, accept that sometimes we will point out differences, not because we hate people, not because we want to be different, but rather because we respect them and love them. And we're taking their views seriously enough to say that that's distinct from my understanding.
Brilliant, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any other thoughts on the second about in what way is the authenticity of the Bible different from the authenticity of other religious texts?
Yeah, good question. I think as a kind of pre-script to that question, I would probably want to say I sort of feel slightly uneasy kind of having a dig at other religions, kind of picking them out, because, their representatives aren't here to kind of defend or to answer back. I think that there are kind of lots of differences between the different kind of sacred books. For example, some of them aren't necessarily rooted in history. Some of them would be more along the lines of kind of saying this is what wisdom looks like, those sorts of things that aren't necessarily kind of historically verifiable, that sort of thing. Others take a kind of particular, I think you can look at and say there isn't any kind of historical, even though they make historical claims, they have been kind of shown not to be accurate, for example, which is why I wouldn't believe in them. But if you want to pick up on particular ones, I'd be happy to discuss that. If I do know something about it, then I would ask about it. But otherwise, I don't really want to kind of just like take a shot at other people's religious traditions. Yeah.
Yeah, Brill. Do we want to open up to the room as well? If we want to do a little bit of a combo, if you have a question that you want to ask as well and actually just want to own your question and shout it out, then raise your hand. There's an opportunity if you want to ask directly now on anything that Kaz has said. If not, we can continue with the Slido. But yeah, fire away.
Sorry, could you speak up?
So
Sorry.
say it once more, just look quite loudly, thank you. It's fine, I'll repeat it once I've heard it, don't worry.
So what are my thoughts on truth as it concerns self-sacrifice? Yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally understanding the heart of the question. So you've said, what about truth when it kind of, what do you mean when it encourages self-sacrifice or submission, rather than truth that would empower someone, for example? Oofters, yeah, good question. I think one of the things that kind of fascinated me about the person of Jesus was that both he claimed to be divine and to be the truth. So Jesus makes just about the kind of ultimate statement about himself that you could possibly make, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. That all kind of power belongs to him. He has all authority. It says that the Father's given him authority. And yet, where his life ended was on a criminal's cross, that he was sent to die a guilty person's death, though he was completely innocent. The kind of biggest possible display of self-sacrifice. And so where I see in the Christian teaching that we should be serving one another, you should love not just those you like, but your enemies, there is a huge kind of emphasis on service to others. That is a kind of a totally subversive way of seeing the world that a lot of other ways of viewing the world wouldn't espouse. How incredible that is not something that is just told to followers to go and do, but instead is something that God himself has done, that gives that kind of self-sacrifice an incredible dignity and value. And it means that it's safe to do that. It's safe to serve others. That can be an empowering thing as well. And I think that is something that completely shook the Roman world into which it was first kind of taught and told, and has continued to do so as it's rippled on throughout history. And that actually there is real power, real beauty in that kind of service of others. The Christian God isn't a God who slams his authority on others and so expects followers to do the same, but instead Jesus said he came not to be served but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. I think there is something hugely beautiful in that picture of God, and also in what it means for his followers. That doesn't always mean that it's kind of easy. I wouldn't draw a line between that and say that it's not empowering, though. Yeah, there's probably lots more underneath that as well to have further conversation about, but I hope that goes some way to answering some of the questions.
Yeah, brilliant question. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we'll have time for just one more, which is, to what extent does the truth of a God matter? Could I not live a perfectly fine life as an agnostic because the existence of a God doesn't make a difference to my life?
Yes, you can. And you are free to go and to do exactly that. What I would say is, I think you're missing out. I think that there is something, I think we do all, I would say, have a desire for truth. Whether that is truth in a kind of like, I want to know the answer to this sort of philosophical riddle, or whether or not you're talking more about a kind of way seeking. What is the way to be a good person, to be a good whatever, husband, good daughter, good teacher, whatever. Those things matter, and I think the conclusion that we come to about whether or not there is a God, who that God is, will hugely influence those things. So I would just say that I think you're missing out if you don't, if you kind of settle with an agnostic, can't really be sure, apart from being kind of slightly intellectually dishonest, because I think there is enough evidence to go on, I think. And I would say that it's dissatisfying, because you will have questions. I can hear my earrings rattling. Sorry, everyone. Can you hear those little tingles? My fashion choices have not helped your hearing today. And I think it's dissatisfying that essentially we want to know what more, and so I suppose I would just say, why wouldn't you want to? Why would you want to kind of settle with that kind of I'm okay without, when there is something so good to discover?
Brill, thank you. Sadly, that is all we have time for questions-wise today. But if you have still got questions that are unanswered, or in fact just more have been coming to mind, please do grab Kaz or any of the known team.
Or just speak to me, no grabbing needed.
Socially distant. Speak to Kaz, who will be hanging around afterwards, and the known team who are helpfully wearing jumpers and lanyards and things. There'll be, lots of time afterwards, and have a chat or chat with people you came with over a free ice cream, which will be very exciting. And also, this is just the start of Known. It's continuing all the way through this week with amazing talks every lunchtime and evening. So, for example, this evening we have a talk by John T. about, I can't remember. That's really helpful. But it looks fabulous. And tomorrow you've got one about what hope is there for our fractured society. Imagine a world where no one was hiding is the talk for this evening. And they sound absolutely brilliant. I'm really excited to explore more of these. And even more excitingly, Known even continues on beyond this week with an event that OICCU runs called The Search. And I think we have a video to introduce that briefly to you. So, that's an introduction to The Search, and it will be happening every Monday and Tuesday. At the minute, it's taking place in people's gardens, which is very exciting, meeting up in small groups with hot chocolate, marshmallows, and the structure is sort of a small talk and then an entire hour to just discuss these sort of big questions. And so it's very easy to get involved. All you have to do is text search to 88802 to receive info about specifics and stuff. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do that if you want. Whip out your phones, go for it. You never know. Maybe one week there'll be something that really just takes your fancy. Also from the May the 17th, hopefully we'll be back at the top of Costa with free drinks and cakes during the sessions, which is obviously extra bonus. Oh yes, and it's happening in person and online. Very helpful. So open to all of you guys. It's been wonderful to have you here with us. Do please hang around and enjoy the ice cream. And if you're on the live stream and those questions are coming through for you as well, why not have a Zoom call with a friend if you're not already on one, and keep these conversations flowing. But yeah, been great to see you, and thank you so much for all the tech team and everyone who's been working behind the scenes. And I hope to see you again soon.